Good afternoon, everyone. Today is January 26, 2023, and we're kicking off our 2023 Infinity Workforce Solutions webinar series. We've got a fantastic webinar in store for you. Roadside inspections, something everybody has an interest in. And fortunately, we have Mr. Keith Long, a subject matter expert extraordinaire and training enthusiast, and has bukus of experience in training our industry and preparing our industry for many things, to include roadside inspections, that will be making his presentation. But before we get too far, if you don't mind, if everyone would open up their chat, tell us who you are, where you're calling in from. We would appreciate that. This will be your forum to engage Keith as he makes his presentation on questions, comments, observations, whatever comes your way. But we want to know where you're calling in from and who you are. Roadside inspections, there are good ones and there are bad ones, but I think we would all agree that they feed very important metrics in our industry, such as the ISS score, inspection selection score. How are decisions made to inspect your truck and your equipment, and how those scores generate from roadside inspections, and of course your CSA scores for both driver and equipment rules and regulations. I would also like to, at the end, there will be an offer for a free demonstration for Infinity Workforce Solutions subscriptions. We have plenty of content to cover this, but we also have a very unique feature for custom content. If you want to do your own custom content for your professional driving staff on how to prepare, what to expect at a roadside inspection, I would encourage you, and if you're not a subscriber, to take us up on the free trial offer that you'll see here at the end. So I know y'all didn't. My name is Mark Ray, and it's my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Keith Long, who will be presenting today roadside inspections. Keith, take it away.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mark. Again, welcome everybody. I am Keith Long, or as I'm affectionately known, the transportation nerd. I tend to dig in where I can, learn what I can. And my goal is to make sure that I empower our drivers and our driver support staff to be the best that they can be, and make sure that our companies are thriving and surviving. So as we get into this webinar, we get to talking about roadside inspections. I want to kick this off with a couple polls, if you will, and you guys can answer as these come up. So one of the first ones I'm going to bring up here is, what percentage of driver violations does form and manner account for annually? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this here. And so what percentage of driver violations does form and manner account for annually?
That's form and manner on hours of service, right, Keith?
Correct. Form and manner on hours of service. And of course, with changes and ELD mandates and whatnot, we all know there's a lot more to talk about there as well.
One would think that form and manner violations should be trending favorably with our electronic log partners.
Right. We see that looking at most common answer, there's 20%. Right. So as we're getting into that, let's talk about common violations, right? So right now across the board, looking at everybody here, we're saying about 20% is the average belief. 50% of people on the call right now, or people that have answered, think about 20%. Well, kind of get to that as we go through here. But in general, out of the top 10 CSA violations surveyed year over year, hours of service accounts for 3 to 5 of those top 10 violations, depending in the past couple of years. This past year, 5 of those. And that problem is becoming bigger for a number of reasons. We'll jump into that more as we get into the answer to that poll here in a little bit. We'll have some more poll questions as well. But the most common here is no record of duty status or false record of duty status, failure to retain past 7 days of logs, failure to maintain 8 blank log sheets in the truck. That's a very common one, and also one that we can fix really easy, right? Aside from having that ELD in the truck, it's important that they also have backup paper logs. And that responsibility, right, is not only the driver, but it's something that as the carrier, we can prepare our drivers for, right? Making sure that maybe in that permit book, we're providing, right, 8 blank log sheets for them to keep with them out on the road. That should really be a standard practice as we're sending drivers out. Vehicle maintenance, as we look at vehicle maintenance, brakes, lights, and tires. All too common, right? We say BLT, brakes, lights, and tires is the common one. When you look at your vehicle maintenance for the last 2 years, what you'll most often find that comes up is things like audible air leaks, flat tires, fabric exposed, tread depth below minimum. Some fun facts when we're looking at that, a tire under 50% of inflation, I've said this before, is considered a flat tire, right? So we can go around and kick those tires, but if we're not checking the inflation pressure, we don't know, right, what we're rolling on. ABS light malfunctions, brakes out of adjustment, mismatched brake chamber. These are all simple things that we can really prepare our drivers for, prepare short trainings for, whether that's using existing trainings that Infinity has regarding vehicle maintenance, or putting, a short video together yourself. And last but not least here, unsafe, right? So according to the FMCSA, one of the most common driver unsafe violations is speeding 6 to 10. And that really trends over year. That's not one that tends to go away. Now, I know a lot of companies, bigger carriers have governed vehicles, right? You set your trucks governed at, let's say, 66, 67 miles an hour. So the question is, how am I getting speeding violations? Where am I getting speeding violations? My trucks are governed. Well, 2 places this happens, right? Downhill, right? Going down a 6% grade, that governor is not going to stop that truck from going over the speed limit without proper management and engagement from that driver. And then speeding in lower speed zones, right? If the truck's governed at 67, we can get over a 45 mile per hour speed limit. So let's talk about here kind of the importance of why we prepare our teams for roadside inspections, right? In general, right, for the company, we reduce CSA scores. For the driver, we reduce CSA scores. And the big one here is reducing that ISS score, right? If we're getting clean inspections, the more clean inspections we have, the less likely it is, or the less you're required to be inspected, right? So you can get to non-mandatory inspect, right? And in general, more money in your driver's pockets. And here's a big one to really incentivize getting clean inspections and making sure that we're starting the day out, getting that truck ready just in case we are inspected, right? That pre-trip inspection or mid-trip inspection. Are you paying your drivers for clean inspections, right? A good policy should be that if a driver's putting in the work and getting a clean inspection on a roadside inspection, they should be paid for it accordingly. And that's, a personal belief of mine, but I think it goes a long way. One, it benefits the company, like I said, to have those clean inspections. But two, it's the one thing that the driver has to take their own initiative for, right? Drivers get paid for miles. They don't get paid to walk around that truck, right? They don't get paid to do that pre-trip inspection in the morning. So that extra effort can see some reward in this way and can benefit both parties.
Keith, you mentioned that speeding violation. Are you seeing any trends with speeding?
Well, it still stands as one of the most common unsafe driver violations, right? And it's the type of thing that wouldn't say it necessarily ticks up, but it's standard across the board, right? That we see them. And a lot of places that we see these are those downhill or speed zone changes and speed traps, right? There's a lot of coming into major metropolitan areas where we change from that 65 or 75 mile per hour zone quickly to a 55. And that can happen in less than a mile, right? So these are places that we can really teach to be ready and to be looking farther ahead and prepare ourselves for those speed changes.
And a driver that's pulled over for speeding, the enforcement officer is still entitled to look around a little bit. Is that a fair statement?
Yep, absolutely, right? Absolutely. Anything's an opportunity for an inspection, right? So that even goes further to that preparedness that we should have daily. So, and actually here to this preparedness, right? So appearance is important. First impressions are important. What do your trucks look like when they're going down the road? Are they taken care of? Do they look well maintained? Is the driver doing their part to make sure that the truck looks well and is well maintained, right? A truck that comes into a weigh station with, papers all over the dash and, as many gadgets and gizmos as they can attach to the front window, it's not going to say more likely to be inspected, but it is a sore thumb sticking out, right? It's an opportunity, because what that message says is, well, if they're not taking care of their first fruits, then more than likely they're not putting in the extra effort to go on and, check out the rest of that vehicle. So it's a situation where a DOT officer, may recognize that as an opportunity to get an unsafe vehicle off the road. Mark, you and I were talking about this earlier. Attitude is everything, right? When we get pulled in for an inspection, the automatic response shouldn't be, "Why did you pull me over?" Or "What is this about?" Or you got no right to be doing this.
Or don't you have anything better to do? That doesn't give a good first impression, does it?
That's exactly it. And for somebody that their job is to inspect that vehicle, right? They can find or spend as much time as they'd like to on it, and that first impression really goes a long way into having a good experience or a bad experience at a roadside inspection, right? So, positivity always wins, and in general, look at inspections as a good thing. Go ahead there.
Yeah, I had another. There's a lot of confusion. I've heard this a lot. I know highway patrol, state-based highway patrol authorities clearly have the authority to pull any commercial vehicle over any time to do inspection. But now we're seeing some municipalities that are also pulling over and doing commercial vehicle inspections. Are they authorized to upload CSA violations if you're a city municipality enforcement officer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And yes, is the answer to that, right? You can get licensed to upload into that system, right? Your city officers, your roadside inspection officers, your motor vehicle division officers, right? If they have the certification, an inspection's an inspection, right? Now, personally, what I think really goes a long way into preparing yourself for these inspections is a standardized inspection checklist, right? So In general, if you've been on the teaching side of the industry long enough, you've heard the question, how long should it take to perform a vehicle inspection? And I bet my bottom dollar, you've been told by a driver, I can inspect that whole vehicle in 15 minutes. And they may be right, but just because they can doesn't mean you should, right? My mantra always has been when teaching and talking to drivers, it takes as long as it takes to do it right. If it's below zero outside, I can guarantee it's going to take longer. You might even have to warm up in the truck in between, right? But just in general, if we're checking everything that should be checked on a tire, right, we're probably spending 2 to 3 minutes per tire. Tread depth, tire inflation, sidewall wear, right? All these things that we should be looking for. And there's 18 of those around that vehicle. So, but in general, what does right look like? So on the screen here, I've got a copy of the FMCSA recommended DVIR. So this tells what items we should be inspecting, but doesn't necessarily tell how we should inspect these items, right? I know that I should inspect my steering system, but what am I looking for, right? This checklist tells you how to do it. In my personal opinion, I recommend using the inspection process outlined in the general knowledge section of the CDL manual, right? If you go to any state CDL manual, that first section of the general knowledge section, so we're talking 2-1 through 2-10, those first 10 pages are the standard vehicle inspection process. And that's really what we should use as a standard. But something as simple as what we have here on the screen is a good place to start to preparing your drivers for clean inspections, right? Because if we don't teach them, if we don't put the tools in their hand, then they're going to be doing it their own way. They're going to be inspecting that vehicle in 15 minutes, right? So when we standardize that process, we build that up with our drivers, but it's also defensible. Another thing here is, that education on how to do it and what to look for, it should be easily accessible. So using, either videos that you're creating internally, stuff that you're teaching in class, PowerPoints, voiceovers, or using a lot of the built-in tools that Infinity has, right? There are endless, vehicle videos within Infinity, how to become proficient at these tasks that a driver does every day. There's even some very robust vehicle inspection procedures within the library that I've taken use of myself. So make sure that DVIRs are being completed for our drivers. And vehicle maintenance violations noted by inspectors, but not on the DVIR, is one of the third most common violations according to the FMCSA, right? So things the driver may have noticed, but it's not documented. So if it's not documented, it doesn't exist.
So these are just equipment violations. And
Right.
You make a good point. I'm looking at her brakes under trailer. What does that mean? What part of the brakes? The brake lining? What is there specialized training that you would recommend instead of just putting a check mark there by brakes? That means these are the specific things that are going to be looked at when you're looking at a brake system.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. If we, like I'm talking with the general knowledge section in say your CDL manual, one of the 4 primary parts that it covers, right, is chambers, hoses, adjusters, and drums. And we go over those components and what we should inspect for each item. So it's not, let's just inspect those brake connections, but what are those primary components? What should we be looking for? I'm looking to make sure that those hoses aren't chaffed or cut, right? I'm looking to make sure that, my drum isn't cracked, it's not overly worn, right? Making sure the pad and lining is in place, it's not overly worn, our ring clamps in place, right? There's all these things that a driver should know, but if they're just looking at a checklist and they don't have the knowledge behind it, then we're really setting them up for failure when they go in for an inspection. Because I can guarantee you that DOT officer, that inspection officer is going to know how to do the right inspection.
Yep.
Another good thing to do here is make sure that your front end staff or driver support staff are informed of the functionality of the vehicle and the things the driver should be looking for. All too often, conversations on vehicle maintenance or components of the vehicle are gibberish to or foreign language to a dispatcher or driver manager, right? And they shouldn't be. They should be just as informed, so that when we're having conversations, we're having informed conversations about that vehicle. And together, we can have our dispatchers holding our drivers accountable, much in the same way that safety does, right? That same message should be unilateral, because in general, safety is everyone's job, and clean inspections are beneficial to the company as a whole.
But before you go on the blitz, if you wanted to contest a violation or appeal a violation, is there a method that a carrier can use to appeal a violation?
Absolutely. So if you're not familiar with the FMCSA portal and you're in transportation, you should get familiar. So portal.fmcsa is your one-stop resource, one for company CSA, as well as what we're referring to here, Mark, are data cubes, right?
Okay.
And this is, let's say we, get a violation, or a driver gets a violation that's inaccurate, or another common one is stacking, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Data queuing is the ability for a motor carrier to submit the required information to say, well, that's not right. We shouldn't have received these points, right? In short, another opportunity is, let's say we get a driver that the pigtail was unplugged between the tractor and the trailer, the electrical connection, right? Now, things that happen there, we've got the tail lights that go out, right? We've got the signal lights that go out. We've got the brake lights that go out. But we get an inspection that says, signal lamp out, marker lights out, brake lights out, all these things that happen from that one primary source, which was that cable, right? That's called stacking, if we're picking up points for all of those. And that's an opportunity to data queue and have those points removed, right? Something that was 5 different violations wrote up and should have been 1 is an opportunity for data queue. But don't be afraid to do it, right? It's not hard to log on and submit a data queue, and there's no harm in doing it. And oftentimes, I think even ones that I've submitted, about 75% of the time or more, data queues are successful, right? It takes some time, right? It's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to get that violation removed overnight. Some states take longer, but it is worth the effort, because at the end of the day, it helps your CSA and it helps lower those scores.
So you can data queue equipment. Can you also data queue a driver violation?
We can data queue driver violations. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about blitzes, right? If you're not familiar with the annual safety initiatives or annual inspection initiatives that is pushed out, by the FMCSA, we call these CVSA. International Road Check is the first one coming up here, May 16th through the 18th. But every year, see this list here, the FMCSA releases dates for the inspection events that will be held throughout the year. And it's a great idea here to write these down and talk about them. You can also find them available on the internet if you search it. But these should be conversations for everybody, right? Our drivers should be well informed, but so should our driver support staff. If you don't know already, aside from these announced dates, there's also an unannounced one-day brake safety inspection event every year. So brake safety events always produce some interesting results. Brake Safety Week last year, so that's the third one we see here. Brake Safety Week Out of 38,117 inspections, 13% of those, or 4,900, resulted in out-of-service vehicle violations, right? So an out-of-service violation, if you're not familiar, and you should be, right, means we can't move that truck. That vehicle is so unsafe that the inspection officer says we don't want that out on the road, right? In the 1-day brake check last year, 9,132 inspections, 14% of those, are just about 1,300 of them, were out of service violations. So brakes are a pain point, and such a pain point that they get their own week when we look at safety initiatives and inspection initiatives. So when does preparation start for these things? Right? It's January now. When should we start? So that should start now, right? Training should be a constant thing. Training should be a constant process, and specifically training for these events should start right away. Right? We should talk about these road checks.
Keith, don't they also have a focus point on the International Road Check Week that they'll tell everybody well in advance, we're going to focus on?
Correct. Last year was wheel ends, right? And that focus of wheel ends. So, you know, what they looked at there, we're talking about brakes, we're talking about tires, rims, lug nuts, hub oilers, axle ends, right? All these things that encompass wheel ends. So as we get into these safety weeks, there is, or pre these safety weeks, they will put out what these inspections are going to be on, or what the focus is going to be on. But in general, right, we don't want to just focus on those items, right? We don't want to spend so much time focusing on wheel ends that we forget about the rest of the vehicle, right? So that's where a robust standardized inspection process comes in. That's where a, through and through company message of expecting drivers to inspect their vehicles daily is important.
So you sold me. I need to start getting ready now for International Road Check. What specifics do we need to do? Mock inspections? Do we do training, online demonstrations? What would you recommend as a best practice to prepare for International Road Check?
Well, you kind of hit it on the head there with all three of those, right? Increased training, right? If you're not already training to inspections, training how to do correct inspections, you should be. Mock inspections. This is something that's easy enough to do when you bring vehicles in for PMs, right? Paying attention to, or preventative maintenance stop-ins, right? Making sure that the vehicle is checked over and that those inspection points that a driver should have seen or should have caught are addressed, right? But yeah, absolutely. A good training, you can either create trainings internally, you can use Infinity and some of those built-in resources. There's a lot there about the vehicle in general and the vehicle inspection process and preparedness, right? But I think another thing that you can really do to prepare yourself for roadside inspections is take a look at your CSA. Take a look at your common violations, yours specifically, your company's. What's coming across every month? What's happening annually every year at this time? Take those violations and put them into your onboarding process as proactive trainings. Put them out to your drivers ahead of time before you get to that violation time period again, and use it as proactive training, right? The more that we can take driver training and push it towards proactive versus reactive, the better off our CSA score is going to be in the long run.
Yeah, and the training is really a combination of training and just information exchange. This is the information that an inspector is going to, the criteria, if you will, the inspector is going to use for both driver and equipment, and just educating our driving staff. This is what they're going to. This is the game we're playing. Get ready.
Absolutely, and I would say, if you go online, go to YouTube, right? That's your second best friend there. Infinity first, and YouTube your second best friend. Yeah. The FMCSA puts out videos on these inspections, on what to look for. You'll see a lot of partnerships with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, with the Nevada Department of Transportation, where they'll have an inspector go through a full inspection process on the vehicle and what they're looking for. And that's a really good resource to get into the mind that's going to be looking at your vehicle and use those as teaching points.
Yes, and I want to put a plug for my friends at CVSA, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, has a lot of really good information. And we'll be doing another webinar prior to International Road Check, but the time to get ready for it is now. Is that right?
Correct.
And you know, the other thing, you talk about all the 13% out of service violations. I guess the good news is there's 87% that got a good inspection report.
That's correct.
And a clean green inspection report certainly helps your ISS and CSA scores as well.
Correct.
It's not all negative.
That's right. So, when it comes down to education, like we were just talking about here, in my personal opinion, failed inspections are 99% of the time, and again, my personal opinion, are the result of missing knowledge, right? Lack of care is something that we're going to see, unfortunately, but lack of knowledge is something that we have the ability to control, right? So if you want to see better inspection scores, if you're tired of violations getting posted, if you're tired of seeing that stuff come across your email, and in general, if you're tired of writing disciplinary action forms, then you do have to get proactive about training, right? We should train to retain, not train to retrain, right? So I think if you want to prepare yourself more so for roadside inspections and that in general, is create disciplinary action procedures that teach how and why vehicle inspecting is important, not necessarily demeaning the action that led to the conversation, right? Get ahead of your violations and make sure that the drivers understand CSA and how it affects them. If you're not teaching your drivers about CSA, then we're setting them up for failure. They should know that it doesn't only affect the company, right? That CSA scores may stay with the company for 2 years, but they stay with the driver for 3 years, right? And that as that CSA score ticks up, if you've got a company threshold to get rid of a driver once they get a certain CSA score or high enough CSA score, well, where does that leave them afterwards, right? They're not going to be hireable by anybody because a high CSA score is like a bad credit score, right? So we should train to retain, and we should train to help our drivers evolve and become better every day. And that starts with proper education.
Another comment I would make on this education is to convince, if you will, everyone that our enforcement community are our partners in obtaining safer highways. They're not the bad guys, they're the good guys, and we need to do a better job communicating that.
Absolutely. When our drivers are out on the road, they're driving alongside our family and their family, right? So it pays to put in the effort to make sure that our roadways are safer. When we talk about why do we inspect, if the answer is to avoid violations, then we have the wrong mindset.
That's right.
We should inspect to be safe because an 80,000-pound vehicle, fun fact, is held to the ground with roughly 10.5 feet of rubber. If you go around and measure that vehicle, 10.5 feet holds 80,000 pounds to the ground, and that's a lower ratio than a personal vehicle, right? So we inspect to make sure that our roadways are safer and that our drivers are successful.
Alex, I'm going to jump in. You asked about the presentation. There will be this presentation will be available for everyone at the end. So I want to answer that. And then Curtis was asking, is there a master list of which violations only affect the driver versus the company?
So absolutely. One, your handy dandy green book, the FMCSA handbook, right, is going to tell you what your violations are. But if you do something as simple, go online and search, right, driver violations, driver CSA violations, right. You're going to get one of the first thing that pops up is the link to that spot in the FMCSA handbook and how those violations are laid out, right. And that's something that, Mark, after this, we can probably push out to now that we're talking about it here, is just a link on where to find that with the CVSA, right? If you're not using your CV or your FMCSA handbook, you should. It's got everything from driver requirements, driver qualifications, all the way to CSA violations, how they happen, what they mean, how to prevent them, and a company's responsibility, as well as a driver's.
Perfect.
Well, Mark, that's what I've got on my end here. If we got any more questions or things we wanted to talk about there.
We do. We've got a question here. What documents need to be collected and kept with the roadside inspection that the DOT requires?
So I guess if we're referring to the driver's end, or are we referring to the company's end, right?
I'm assuming the company's end. And I know there's fix-it that require a recommunication, if you will.
Right.
The company's end is Mr. Matthews.
Got it. So, I mean, in general, right? So we're gonna retain those inspection and just, gosh, really, I don't know how to answer that.
It's really electronically stored now, isn't it?
Yeah,
really
yeah,
everything
it
is
is
electronically stored. I know I've been in some depositions, and the plaintiff's attorneys know the exact date, time, place, who, when, and where of everything, and they get it off of a roadside inspection report, and they use that very creatively in some of their lawsuits. I know that. So it's it's a publicly, it's not all public, but most violations you can get your hands on them if you're a shipper looking to screen a carrier, if you're hauling petroleum products out of a refinery or something like that, or if you're a plaintiff's attorney and you're trying to dig up some dirt on somebody, you can find those violations.
Yeah, and all that information that you really need is going to be on that violation, right? But beyond that, using the FMCSA portal is another great location, because you can go into your CSA categories and go into those specific inspections that your company's received and pull a copy of that inspection report or the documents that went along with that inspection. So again, that's portal.fmcsa, right?
And Curtis is asking, is there a place I can check my ISS score?
That's also in the portal. Yep. On the home landing page on the portal, that is all right there. You got kind of just a go-to one-stop shop for CSA.
Here's another question from Mr. Dominguez. Is there a driver that we look to hire with something on his CSA and he gets hired by us? Do his violations, I'm assuming you mean come along with him? Is that correct, Mr. Dominguez? I think I know the answer to that. In other words, yes. His points, if you hire a driver who has existing CSA points on his, how does that impact the company, or how does that impact him personally?
Right. So points are incurred by a company when a driver gets a violation under that DOT number, right? So as a driver for my company, if I get a violation, the company then gets that violation. So does the driver. If a driver leaves my company and goes to another one, the driver takes his points along with him that he personally incurred, right? But he's not going to take the points from company A and move them over to company B, right?
Okay. a little bit of PSP, pre-employment screening. You want to give us a quick 30-second overview of the PSP program?
So when we go through a PSP, right, we're talking MVR extract, driver's background, driving record, things like that. Kind of depends on what resources you're using to pull those, right? But all in all, within that PSP report, we're going to look at a driver's overall violation history, license revocation, license suspension, license activity, all that's going to be in there. Hopefully you've got your own company parameters on red flags and things like that you pay attention to, or risk categories that you pay attention to, or in general, places where you say, no, we're not going to hire this driver.
So when you run the PSP, it shows his or her prior CSA violations.
It's going to pull, so we can pull a violation report, yes, when you're doing that PSP, absolutely, or MVR extract that would come along with that.
Okay.
And a lot of that's also available internally as well, I suppose, once you get that driver hired, but pre-employment.
I've got a question of my own. I don't know the answer to this one on that. Does it also show as good inspections, or does it just show the bad?
As far as I've seen, just violations are the things that are going to show up, right? No high fives that come along with that paperwork, unfortunately.
Should be, but that's
right. Absolutely, it'd be a good way to gauge what side of the fence they're on.
And Lowell is saying, along with an out of service roadside to maintain roadside inspection, the document, the proof of repairs, and the driver logs. I think that's probably pretty good practice. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And more than likely, when it comes down to it, right, especially, as we talk about things like red flags, right, making sure that we have that documentation that shows that repair has been completed. And as a company, you should have a tracking process that goes along with that. If a violation is noted, you want to make sure that you're not putting that vehicle back out on the roadway with that same violation. So if the driver notes it, or the FMCSA or the DOT officer notes that on an inspection, that should be getting taken care of, because it's negligent to put that equipment back out on the road with the same violation, knowing that if they get cited, now you've got two drivers that got a violation for the same thing that could have been fixed. So one, get it fixed. Two, track that, because if you get audited, you're going to want to have that paperwork or that background on that.
And I'm going to put my plaintiff's attorney's hat on for just a second. And if it's a driver violation, I'm going to ask, what corrective action did you do about it? Did you ignore it, or did you do something about it? And that's every plaintiff's attorney is going to ask that question. So I would just put in a plug. Infinity Workforce Solution has corrective action on any violation, and I would strongly encourage there to be some documented corrective action on any out of service violation. Would you agree with that, Keith?
Absolutely. And one of the personal benefits with Infinity is certificates that are generated post-training, right? I get a driver that, has let's just say a driver violation, to be, non-specific, right? And we put them through a training. Infinity generates trackable information, right? That I can go back and put a file together and say, here are the things that this driver was trained on, right? That looks a lot better than saying, well, yeah, gee, I think we did something.
And Mr. Hahn's got a very good question here. Driver got a first-time violation for not wearing a seatbelt, unrestrained, and failure to yield to emergency vehicle, trying to determine how badly that affects the company and the driver.
Well,
that's
not a great one, right? Off the top of my head, I can't tell you what exactly those points are, but I can tell you they're not going to be pretty. Unrestrained is a bad one, and it's preventable, right? Failing to yield to emergency vehicle, I think is what you said there. Yeah. Also, I mean, let's top the charts there. I think you can put those right up there with driving with flat tires and what those violations look like.
Leo's helping us out. Seatbelts 20 points. So
20 points. There you go. Absolutely.
So I guess the real answer is how many, is that diluted over how big a fleet you are, and a lot of questions like that. But that's not a good experience with those CSA violations.
Right. And benefits, right, as the industry changes, we have vehicles coming into service that have preventative measures for that, right? If you're buying newer tractors, I think a lot of them within the past 4 years, you can't put that vehicle into gear or into drive without all the bells and whistles going off if your seatbelt's not fastened.
Right. And unrestrained, it just still confuses me how big an issue is unrestrained, but it's a significant contributor to fatalities with commercial vehicles. And Lisa, I believe, has given everyone, if you look at your chat, a link that you can look up all the scores for CSA violations. And we appreciate that, Lisa. We're about to bump up on our time. Keith, this is a robust conversation we've had here with our clients. I think getting ready on beginning your preparation on January the 26th for Road Check 2023 is a fantastic idea. I think there are plenty of resources. CVSA, Infinity's got plenty of resources, but you got to start sooner rather than later. I know, unfortunately, some of the drivers just take the position, I'm just going to sit it out. I'm going to take a vacation that week. And the reality is over 85% of the drivers that get inspected are going to get a positive or a clean inspection. And sitting it out is not the solution. Sitting out Road Check is not the solution. I would strongly discourage that. And our friends with CVSA and our state highway patrolmen do a fantastic job. They communicate very clearly what their focus is going to be, where they're going to, here's what's, and it's just a good event for our industry. I think it's a great tool, and should not be avoided if that's the case.
Right. And don't, to your point there real quick, Mark, is don't shoot yourself in the foot by grounding your trucks, during that week or during these road checks, right? These are times where we're going to see more inspections. And when we talk about CSA scores and what's actually happening, right, it's a balancing scale. It's a teeter-totter. The more clean inspections we have against our bad inspections, right, that's going to benefit our CSA score. Those scores are going to lower, right? So don't miss an opportunity to get clean inspections. Yeah. Prepare now, get drivers out there, and that can be the changing week or the changing day to benefit your CSA score for the better.
Maybe even consider giving them a little bonus for a good inspection.
Absolutely.
And Lisa's got an interesting fact. CVSA states that 15 trucks per minute are being inspected during International Road Check. That's a lot of inspections. That's a lot of
work.
That's a lot of work going on out there. Thank you for that, Lisa. Well, I do want to go the demonstration. If you want a demo, call the number, give 866 that's on your screen there. There's an email address, info@vertical. Keith, you have your contact information you can give us for comments, questions. We will be doing more preparation. We'll probably include our friends with CVSA up in Topeka, Kansas, that help us with preparation and all the work that they do ahead of time. But it is time to get started on Road Check 2023 that's in May. You don't want to start 3 days ahead of time because it's not going to get you anywhere. So we appreciate everybody. There's your information. Let's have a great 2023. Let's turn this highway safety issue into a positive for our commercial vehicles. That can be done, don't you think, Keith?
That it can, and it starts now. Now. This is the year for it. So let's put our time and effort in and make sure we're training our drivers and front end staff to be ready for it.
So investing time to visualize what to inspect during a roadside inspection is an excellent practice, and we need to get started right away.
That's it.
All right. Well, I'm going to sign off. Please take us up on our offer on the demonstration. Keith, thank you very much. Look forward to working with you with some more information exchange webinars as we go into 2023. Thank everybody for signing in your questions. I think we got some of them. There weren't some we didn't get to, but we'll send us an email and we'll get back to you. Thank you very much. We're signing off here at Infinity Workforce Solutions.
Thanks, everyone.